the title is Crossing Boundaries. So to me, boundaries means there's one thing that separates other things. So to me, technology is a new element within calligraphy and different processes. So I consider calligraphy to be a traditional process. So anything that I do in addition to that would be new. So this idea of crossing boundaries between old and new. So here I'm using the pyrographic technique. Pyro meaning fire. So pyrographic literally is I'm playing with fire. To do that, we have a fantastic facility in Sunderland, the National Glass Centre. So I was able to use the glass facility there. So I literally drew the glass, the molten glass from the furnace, and then I would press the hot glass onto the paper to burn the paper. So these are burned marks, okay? These 4 pieces here were done in one, as one piece. So you have to have very long arms to do that. These are kind of other pieces which uses the same technique. Yeah. So in terms of the approach, it's very simple. You make the burn marks and then you do the calligraphy. Now, normally I would just have a whole batch of paper and I'll just make lots of different marks because you can't predict what the marks look like because depending on the glass, the shape, the size, the temperature, basically the glass dictates what marks you're going to get. And when you get first draw it out of the furnace, it's quite soft. So when you press it onto the paper, you can kind of mold it, but then within sort of 10 seconds or so, it starts to harden. And then you need to then learn very quickly how to turn it around or press harder or whatever. Trouble is, when you press too hard, it goes into flames, yeah. So you need to have an assistant with a water spray to douse the fire. So
how do you get those thin streaks, Manny?
Right, the thin streaks is a really interesting technique. So basically, the glass is a bit like plasticine. So you would have the hot glass, and then you would use another utensil to literally stretch. Yeah, stretch the glass so it's like a glass strand, and then you let it fall, and then it will create that burn mark. Yeah. So it's lots of different techniques. These marks here, these were made by putting the hot glass into a mold. That looks like a kind of like a cupcake mold, yeah. And then that creates the ribbed shape, in which then you can roll across the paper to create the marks. You see, so it's different techniques within this. So it's quite interesting. So I quite often just go over there with a batch of paper, and then just do lots of marks, and then see what happens. Quite often, out of 10 pieces, you probably only get 1 piece that would work. Well, that's fine. It's all part of the playing. To me, doing creative work is quite challenging sometimes, but I tend to enjoy doing things I don't know rather than doing things I do know. Because if you keep doing things you do know, then it's just boring, right? So I trying to do things that I don't know, where I have less control or less predictability, and then just let things evolve like that. So to me, that's much more challenging and enjoyable. Yeah. Moving on. Sorry?
Can you repeat the same design?
No, I mean,
cannot.
No, it's impossible. It's impossible. I can never repeat that again, that mark. It's very, very unique. Moving on to another aspect, using literally digital technology. All the elements you see here, apart from this one, which I'll explain later, these are all handwritten, hand-painted, and then scanned into a software called Photoshop. You probably heard of Photoshop, where you can have different layers and you can move things around and basically add a bit of color. Or in this case, I deliberately made a blurred lens edge effect, because I don't want people to think this is a traditional piece of work. It's actually digital. So this idea that seemingly from a distance it looks like it's hand done, but it's just hand done, but there's digital elements within that. And then I would add handmade element like my seal or bits of gold and things like that. So I like this kind of ambiguity sometimes, So this is the same technique. I scan the background, and then the writing, and then put the two together. So relatively, it's quite simple to do. It's just that Thomas, where is he? He keeps saying to me, Manny, we need some big pieces. And I was thinking, oh, what's the quickest way to do that? And obviously, digital technology would be great. So, that could be blown up to A1 size with no problem. This one is very interesting. I did this a few years ago in an exhibition in Scotland, in Dundee. And what it is, these texts were generated by if you like, a computer or robot, right? And basically, it extracts text from articles within the newspaper. So sometimes it's quite random. So, if you read the text, it's quite strange. It doesn't make sense sometimes, but it's just actual text that's used in newspaper. So I used them almost like haikus, like poems. And then I basically added the Chinese background to that to make it kind of take it to a different kind of context. So it's quite interesting, that one. So it uses kind of lots of different technologies. So someone has programmed that text extraction software, and then I use the text. Oh, by the way, the calligraphy you see here is actually typography, because I actually designed a font based on my writing. So here I literally just typed the calligraphy, which is much easier. Because if you make a spelling mistake, you can just control Z, right? But yeah, but I don't do that quite often. I don't find that challenging enough. It's too easy. It's too simple. So I like to do hard things. So, but for this particular purpose, is interesting. Because the conference was about new technology and its place in art. So I thought it was quite appropriate to use my own font in this case. Okay, quickly moving on. Again, using technology, this time using the laser cutter machine. So normally with the laser cutter, it cuts through the materials, yeah? Paper, wood, or plastic. In this case, you can control the level of burn, if you like. So it's only etched away bits of the wood. So these are all plywood. This one's quite interesting. It actually recognized the different tonalities of the work. So here, which is the white paper, it etched away the most, leaving the black writing and the black marks here, and so on. So you have different layers of etching, if you like. So that's quite an interesting technique. I might do more of that. I mean, the wonderful thing about digital work is you can manipulate it whichever way you wish, really, and in terms of you can do things over and over again. But it's an interesting notion, though, that many people think digital calligraphy is not as valuable as a handmade piece. I don't know what people think, but if I say to you, for example, I made this piece, I scan it, I laser etch it, and then I would throw the file away. So there's no more. So this is one only. Does that make any difference? Yeah, to the value? Yeah, so it's worth thinking about, isn't it? It's interesting. So talking about traditional calligraphy, this is obviously beautiful Chinese calligraphy, written by my PhD student. I must say my Chinese calligraphy is embarrassing. So I've written the Western calligraphy to obviously complement that. And that's quite an interesting process, because I actually wrote that first, and then he has to write this afterwards. And sometimes he would write that first, and I would have to write that afterwards. So so he would write that first, and I would react to it. So in terms of collaboration, it's quite interesting. I like collaborating with different artists because it forces you to work in a different way. Quite often, if you just work by yourself, you kind of just do things your way. And sometimes if you work with people, you have to respect other people's work, their thinking, their use of materials, etc., etc. And then you have to think about a different way of working, which I really kind of like. Yeah, I suppose it's like any kind of subjects that we do, like science, or when you collaborate, you have to understand each other, right? So yeah, so that's what I try to do there. Okay, so moving on, we have a couple of pieces of kind of longer text, and to be very frank, I hate writing long text because I'm just a lazy calligrapher. So I really have, only do long text like this if I really have to. So this was done for an exhibition in Japan, so I prepared myself to do that. And this was a commission for someone's retirement, so I thought, yeah, that's worthy of doing. Otherwise, I normally only write a couple of lines, a few words, and that's it, really. Yeah. So sometimes it's good to be lazy. This uses computation, so the idea that my PhD student actually wrote a piece of coding to tell the laser cutter to burn these marks on the paper. So it's just coordinates, really, random coordinates. So each time it does that is a different design. So it's quite interesting. And then to contrast that, really, I just wrote something quite simple. There's no simplicity without complexity. This idea of harmony and balance. We have lots of conflict and stuff like that in the world, and sometimes it's good to have a bit of harmony, and balance in what we do. And this is a similar idea. I call these cauliflowers. So I start with the A and then B, C, D. So I basically rotate the paper as I write, and then I just balance that with a piece of writing. It says letters are symbols which turn matters into spirit. So this idea that letters seemingly are just quite boring things, right? Letters, which, if you put them together, make them into words and then sentences and paragraphs. But when you can do them creatively, they have their own spirit. It changes into something that is quite profound. So that's what I was trying to do there. Okay, and then moving around to this part here. I suppose all this is my kind of Sumi ink or Chinese ink or Soimatwa period. I'm really intrigued by the combination of different brushes, inks, and paper, and any difference in those, each element would change the way the ink works, for example. Or so sometimes I deliberately use brushes I never used before. My favorite is a chicken feather brush. Literally, it's very, very soft, so you can't control what it can do. So these are the chicken feather marks. And then this one was made by literally a piece of bamboo, but beaten. So the fibers all kind of, spread. And then again, you can't really control what it can do. So it's quite interesting. And then these are done with a goat hair brush, and so on, so on. So I mentioned earlier that, we see Chinese ink as always as black ink, yeah? But in fact, there's lots of tonality of color within the black ink. So some are kind of quite cool, like a bluey tone to it. Some has a kind of a more green tone or brown tone or red tone. So depending on which ink you use, it gives you a different kind of color to the work, which is quite interesting. So seemingly they're all just black and white, but they're not. Yeah. So I really like how, and it's really strange. Only sort of East Asian inks could do this. The way it interacts with water and the paper. The thing is, when I paint this, you can't really see all the subtle effects, right? And it's not until you mount it, 標裝, then you can see the full effects of that, So sometimes, for example, a piece of work like this, it looks very simple. So I would do the painting, I would mount it, I would then glaze it with the acrylic matte medium in order for me to write the English, because if I don't, the ink would just spread all over the place. But all this would take about 2 to 3 days of work, because you can't hurry, you can't use a hairdryer and dry the work. You have to let it dry naturally. You have to prepare the paste for the mounting. You need to seal the work. You need to then write, and so on and so on. So imagine you know, you spend probably 2 days just to prepare the background, and then you have to do the writing, so you can't afford to make any mistakes, you know. Although saying that, I have probably made 2 or 3 mistakes for these series of work. So yeah, so that's quite interesting. So this is something I really want to pursue more in the future. Maybe bigger pieces or some other ideas. Okay, good. Yeah, and then moving on to here. Okay, I made a couple of pieces here which are similar, and it's essentially just one brush mark and then some calligraphy. Seemingly, it's very simple, you know, well, it is. But as I said in my presentation earlier, you know, it's taken me 30 years in order to be that bold and be able to do that, you know. So it's not that simple after all. So there's lots of contradictions in what I do. Sometimes my work seemingly looks very quick and fast. In fact, it takes a long time to write this, you know. And sometimes when, you know, something looks quite sort of simple, it's actually quite complex. So yeah. I'd like to share this quote with you. I think it kind of explains what I'm trying to do for the last 20, 30 years. It says, draw bamboos for 10 years, become a bamboo, then forget all about bamboos when you're drawing. It's just so true to most things that we do in life, yeah? You really have to know what you're doing first, and then you can just let it go. And then is where the freedom and the creativity can then start to develop and so on. So you know, it just enforces the idea that it's so important to have a solid grounding in everything that we do, be it, you know, mathematics, science, whatever, you know. We have to have that discipline, and then once you understand that, then you can let go, you know. So for example, this writing here, that was developed from that, this idea of just letting go and just see what happens, and then things. So I've been turning letters this way, that way, you know, which you don't normally do. Well, why not, you know? So, but it creates a wonderful kind of texture and rhythm in there. And this one, for example, looks very simple. In fact, it took a long time to write this because each stroke, you have to then manipulate the corners to make sure it's nice and sharp, and so on and so on. So that probably took me about an hour, 2 hours to write. I mean, seemingly that looks very quick and simple. So there's lots of kind of complexity in my work. But again, it looks quite simple, right? So, and then just like to talk about sketchbooks. I have lots of sketchbooks all over the house, in my workplace and so on, because I just find idleness a pain. You know, sometimes when your computer just go like this and like this, yeah, it takes forever to stop. So I just doodle a page while I wait, you know, or you know when you ring someone, is like, please hang on for 10 minutes. So I just like doodle and things like that. So I find it quite therapeutic to have a sketchbook around me. So I have many of these. So I never managed to complete any of them, but I have lots of different sketchbooks, you know. So that's interesting. And then just to finish off, I think, this piece here. This is a collaboration with a Japanese artist called Christine Flint Sato. She did the beautiful background. And we had an exhibition last year. And we decided to use the quote by Basho, who's a famous Japanese monk. And I decided to kind of write vertically as well. So there's lots of challenges here. Well, the simple challenge is you have to write on top of someone's beautiful work. I mean, that's a challenge in itself, right? And then I thought, oh, well, that's too easy. What can I do to make it even more challenging? So I decided, right, let's write it vertically, because I was intrigued by Chinese writing, Chinese calligraphy, where you write vertically. But obviously, Western writing, like Western letter forms are not constructed to be written vertically. It's always horizontal. So it took me a while to work out how I can connect the letters together in a vertical way. but at the same time, I don't want to make it look too contrived. It needs to look natural. So yeah, it took a lot of thinking to do that. So anyway, the quote says, "Every day is a journey, and the journey itself is home." Basho. So the idea is that the background is a set of landscapes, because Basho is well known for his travel around Japan. I think he did about 20,000 miles of walking through his life or something like that. So we want to express the idea that this is a journey, and the letters are appearing, disappearing throughout the landscape as though he's taking a journey, or the letters are taking a journey. Yeah. So in terms of the process, we were in Japan and we kind of worked out the idea of the piece, and then she did the background, and then she literally folded the paper into A4, put it in the envelope, and sent it to me in UK. And then I open it, say, wow. and then I have to seal the whole lot with acrylic matte medium. So imagine doing that to someone's work. So once it's sealed, you can then write on top of it. Before that, she sent me samples of the paper and the ink that she's going to use. So I deliberately make sure that the ink that I use for my writing matches her ink, because I talked earlier about the ink having different colors. So this is quite warm brown ink. So if I use a blue black ink, then it wouldn't work. Yeah. So there's lots of kind of experiments involved before this. And obviously, once we finished the work, I carefully rolled it up in a tube, make sure it's all packaged properly, and then sent it to Japan, where they then mount this properly in a very special way. Because normally the scrolls are hung vertically, whereas this is horizontal. So they added these eyelets for you to put pins onto. Yeah. So yeah. So that's quite an interesting process, because it really forces you to do things differently. Otherwise, it's, you just write something. It's easy, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that's everything. Well, it's a great opportunity for me to showcase my work here. It's been wonderful, and I can't thank enough of the people here. Fantastic team of people. Putting up this show, it's just really fabulous. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.